Hi and welcome to Mark's Motivational Podcast, another Authors Tuesday episode. So today I'm delighted to be joined by a great guest, a great author, who I met through the Inkslingers, the writers group, Declan Cosson. Is that right? I'm pronouncing that correct? Yeah,
Cosson. Yeah.
Cosson. Sorry,
Yeah.
sorry about
Yes. Yeah.
that.
Don't
Sorry.
worry. It's
Yeah, yeah. So
Go
Declan,
ahead.
thanks a lot for joining me. You're very good. Thanks a million for joining me today.
Thanks for the offer.
Yeah, cool. So we'll probably start off the podcast. If you'd like to tell the listeners a little bit about yourself and about your writing as well, would be great. The book you're working on.
Right. So to start off with, I was born in Paris in 1999, but then my family moved to Dublin when I was like 1 year old. I think I was
Okay.
I barely remember what age I was when we moved to Dublin, which
Yeah.
is why my accent sounds anything but Parisian. I mostly grew up in Ireland. I basically grew up in Ireland, in Dublin, in the Dublin area.
Yeah.
As for my writing, I started when actually I was 15. Was the first time when I started writing was when I was actually 15. I mean, the stories I wrote back then weren't that great. I didn't really write anything eligible for proper publication until 17, as far as I'm concerned. That's when I started working. But I did publish numerous short stories to the Clonkeen Anthology. My secondary school, Clonkeen, had an anthology which I submitted. So submitted bits of short stories here and there. My latest publication was all the way back in 2021. It's
Okay.
this book here, the collection The Yearly Strange.
Great.
And yeah.
And is that available? Is that available to buy on
available
Amazon?
on Amazon. It's
Great.
available on
Yeah.
Amazon, so anyone should be able to buy it there.
Great. Yeah, if you want to share the link to your books as well, I can put them on the show notes for people to get as well. Yeah.
So do I do that through the type message or?
Yeah, you can do after the show week. You can just send it to me. I can put on the show notes then.
Thank
Okay.
you. That would be brilliant.
Yeah, no
Thanks.
problem. Yeah, so yeah, that's great. So you started writing when earlier in your years when you were 15, was it like?
Yeah.
And like how did that go for you? Did you kind of was it a lot in school? You kind of knew you had the talent for it, was it? Really?
I'm actually trying to think of how I actually started writing. I think one thing, you might be surprised by this, but actually before 15, I remember losing interest in novels very briefly between the ages of 12 and 13 and 14. And weirdly enough, what got me back into novels was a video game, actually, looking into video games. I was looking through the history of real-time strategy games and found that there was a game based on the War of the Worlds, and I was surprised to see a Victorian classic like that inspire a video game. So I wanted to know more, and I ended up reading the War of the Worlds. And that, ironically, was actually, I know it's a weird origin to getting into novels, but that was actually what started it. I think that was the earliest time I remember I expressed interest.
Yeah, and it was like mostly your books are based a lot on war. Is it like kind of war kind of stories?
Often
Isn't it really,
science
Declan?
fiction. Yeah,
Science fiction,
war
yeah,
often
yeah.
based on science fiction, although my last two novels, as in my last two manuscripts, I haven't published any of my novels yet, but my last two manuscripts were thrillers.
Oh, great. Yeah, yeah.
So yeah, you're right overall.
And like I love that you do the sci-fi as well, Declan. Like because one of my favorite authors was Philip K. Dick. You know, you probably
right, the guy who wrote
yeah.
When Androids Dream of Electric Sheep.
That's right.
That
yeah. And the Running Man as well, wasn't it?
I remember the one I remember, and we studied this in college. It was called "We Can Remember for You Wholesale."
Oh yeah.
Yeah, there's a movie. There's a Schwarzenegger movie based on that, but we read the proper thing.
Minority Report as well was one, wasn't it?
I don't remember. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no. So no, it's okay. Yeah. So like, I met you through the Inkslingers.
I know.
Do you find that really good? I found that really great for the prompts.
I mean, I absolutely love the Inkslingers personally.
Yeah, it's great because do you find that like you got a lot of your ideas for your stories from the
I
prompts?
think what helps with the Inkslingers is that it allows me to read what I've already written. And I think that's really important to keep me going,
Mm,
is being able to read to people. I think weirdly, interestingly enough, something that reading a novel aloud actually helps is actually to clean up your text,
mm,
because it really forces you to actually articulate properly if you're going to read aloud. So because you want it, this was something I think I learned from one of my peers in college. Apparently this Harrison Ford said in regard to some of the script of the first Star Wars film ever. This was back when A New Hope. Apparently Harrison Ford said to George, apparently the script was quite bland, so he said, George, you can read this, but you can't say it. I learned this, by the way, from a peer in my class in college, who
mm.
told me this story. I just thought that was an interesting quote. Uh, so
Yeah.
this idea of reading, I suppose, reading aloud, essentially.
Mm. No, I totally agree with you, Declan, because even I find it great there after the like you've done the half an hour and you get to read your stuff and you get some great
Mm.
response from the rest.
Yes.
Mm. It's great. And do you have any would you like to kind of get your books? Because I kind of what I get out of it as well is that like they go well in the film or something to that effect. Is that something you'd be interested in doing yourself, Declan?
I don't know yet if making a movie out of my books. I mean, I'm still neutral on that, given
Okay.
that what I've often found with adaptations is that, with a very rare exception, they often get it wrong, a lot of it wrong.
Okay.
And I'm often like, I've
Mm.
ironically coming back to War of the Worlds, like I noticed that. And I mean, there's been numerous cases of like texts and novels that have been where the whole story has been completely I think written in a way that it just doesn't at all resemble what the author originally imagined it to do, if that makes
Mm.
sense.
It does definitely, yeah.
I don't know if you have that fear, but I've certainly often had that fear with my work.
Mm. Yeah, that makes a whole lot of sense because it's your work and you don't want it
Yeah.
to be
Hmm.
messed up and changed in any
I
way.
know.
Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah. Yeah, no, it's a great point. Yeah, great stuff. And as well as that, Declan, could just ask you, the way when do you have a kind of a strategy you use with your writing? What I mean by that, do you kind of have a certain
I
amount of words you do a
think
day or
it depends. For me, Mark, it depends on. So to kind of lay out my strategy, like I'm trying to think with words. Like what often I do is that said I write the thing in a copy, so I have a hardback where I
okay.
write it on paper, and then when I'm finished, I might take a break to relax my hands.
Mm-hmm.
Because actually relaxing your hands, I don't know if you've ever felt that yourself, but like there were times where writing a manuscript can absolutely strain your hands.
Yeah, big time.
So what I do then is that I type it up.
Mm-hmm.
I think actually because you edit the process as you go along when you're writing and then you type it. And actually it's like refining oil. It's like you drill the oil and then you put it through the refinery and then it becomes something you can actually use. I find that's the same with writing. Is that you write it hard on paper and then you type up the draft. And then something I often do is that I've often sent my manuscripts, the documents which I write my manuscripts on, to my parents for proofreading. So that because
Very
you
good.
often find with another pair of eyes will instantly notice something that we don't.
Yeah, that's a great strategy and it's great for anybody that's listening. That's brilliant, Declan,
Yeah.
because
I
yeah,
mean, that
because
would be one of my main advice. It's just the one downside is that it can take a lot of patience. It takes, and it can
mm,
be quite exhausting. That I've
yeah.
often found there were times where I've written a novel and then it would be like a manuscript and then it would be ages before I write another novel because it's tired. But it
Yeah.
is worth it. Like I would absolutely advise that to anyone.
Yeah, that sounds great advice. Thanks for that, Declan. And what's the name of the novels that you're working on?
The current novel is that I'm working on publishing is a
Yeah.
novel that I've yet to actually that I actually wrote all the way back. Started writing on when I was 17.
Okay. Yeah.
It was a novel I don't want to give too much away about it.
Of course, yeah.
I wanted to talk a bit more about my short story collection because that was published, whereas this
Oh yeah,
novel, it's
apologies.
called...
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah,
No,
sorry.
you're
Yeah,
grand, Mark. You're perfectly fine. I mean, my current novel that I'm working on is called Blood and Gears. It's a very kind of grim, dark war story that can be best described as Deer Hunt, the film. I don't know if you know the film Deer Hunter.
yeah, I do. Yeah, yeah.
Deer Hunter meets Blade Runner. Essentially, it's set in this grim, dark version of the future, and where a very harsh, very regimented, but overall, like, you know, nationalistic world government named Terra is trying to defend humanity from the machines.
Okay.
And so basically, I mean, that's the broader picture, and it's doing that through this army of conscripted superhuman men called Legionnaires. That's the broader. It's a lot like if you think of Warhammer. If you think of Warhammer, that's very much, except not happening mainly on Earth. That's what's happening. And basically, the story revolves around an 18-year-old fella from New York named Zach. He's basically recruited into this squad named Alpha Squad. That's just the way they're coded.
Yeah.
And so basically what happens is that during a battle that goes badly for Legionnaires, was the name, the army essentially of this government. And basically a battle goes badly for them. And however, he rescues a young boy that's been left behind in the panic. So basically the city that they were defending has to be evacuated because of a scorched earth policy. But a little local boy in St. Petersburg gets cut off from his parents during this chaos. So my hero basically and his squad rescue him, and then basically they go on a quest to basically return that boy to their parents. There's also lots of other things like that are happening, but it is that, just to give you a simple vibe, that's what the story is about.
No, that would really kind of sparks people's interest in the story. So that's great, Declan. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
We'll get back to your short stories that you do want to talk a bit more about. Do you want to maybe mention a few of them and maybe briefly explain, maybe let the listeners know about them a bit? Be great.
Okay, so my collection in general is called the Collection The Eerily Strange. Okay. And it's really a random collection of different short stories, mainly in where people encounter monsters and fight them. So, for example, one of my stories is called UFO. It takes place in a very kind of waspish Anglo-Saxon suburbia, you know, that quintessential 50s suburbia of like Eisenhower's time. Basically revolves about a young fighter pilot who basically tries to infiltrate a UFO to rescue his young son, his baby son.
Yeah.
And basically what happens is that our protagonist, Alec, gets kidnapped by the aliens himself. And of course, there's this organization. There's these two agents, undercover agents, that are working for an organization called SWORD, the Society of Orbital Research and Defense, that are, of course, trying to intercept aliens and defend Earth. And so basically, Alex's wife, Anna, initially going out to find the police, try and look for her husband, she comes across these two guys, and they end up getting the message. So spoiler alert, they rescue him. Very quintessential 1950s kind of thing. It's a short story, so the stories are a lot more simplistic. And so if you're wondering why I called it the Collection The Eerily Strange, the name comes from, I don't know if you're aware of this, Mark, but basically in a period in America between around the 1890s to I think around the 1950s, so around the end of the Second World War, there was this thing called pulp. If you've ever heard of that, pulp magazines.
I did hear about before, yeah. Pulp,
Basically, it was a form of literary genre in which magazines often themed around a different genre. So you could have the Amazing Tales, which would be horror and fantasy, or you have astounding science fiction. Actually, it's worth noting that Philip K. Dick's We Can Remember For You Wholesale was actually published in one of those to begin with. Yeah. As was H.P. Lovecraft and Robert E. Howard. He was published as well in one of those. So like it was a particularly like this astounding. So basically it was this collection of different short stories. There was often magazines. This isn't in my current collection, but like in the original things, there were often kind of advertisements for the latest guns or cars or
Okay.
shaving products or whatever. It was this very fascinating literary form that published a lot of different horror and sci-fi and fantasy authors and thrillers and war stories. Like there were even what were called, I think there were crime thrillers like The Black Mask. That was a magazine for crime. And then there were also, for the more kind of wealthier aspects of American society, there were what were called the glosses. And that's where all the romance and melodrama went into. So that's just so that you know, that's a very, very long-winded explanation, but that's where I got the title.
Okay. Well, yeah. So a fair bit of research went into it, Declan. Like,
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, and I learned to, and I actually studied. There was one of my favorite modules in college was that we studied the different examples from the time.
Oh, great.
Stories. I mean, overall, the collection, The Early Strange, it's a mixture of horror and but there's horror and science fiction and adventure. I mean, but it also is kind of like military science fiction in it. So to give you an idea of another short story I wrote.
Oh, brilliant! Yeah.
It's called the short story itself is called Panzerlied. It's actually a German name. I think it's literally called. Can't remember what it exactly means, but it was originally a tank song for the German army. And so basically, however, the story takes place in the same era that Blood and Gears takes place in, except it focuses basically on a Germanic tank crew that fights for this world government. Like they're all unified under the same government by this era, but there's still different national identities under that. And so in Panzerlied, our main protagonist is a young fella named Ernst Castiliac, so he's half German, half French. And he basically, their tank gets knocked out by an EMP blast, and they have a little pigeon on board, and they send that messenger pigeon to get help. That's a basic rubric of what that short story is about.
That sounds absolutely great. Yeah, that sounds really, really interesting.
Yeah,
that's brilliant. And like, is that particular one? That's the one that's available on Amazon, is it?
Yeah, the collection, The Early Strange, is available on Amazon.
Great stuff. And I love the cover. The cover is really good as well.
Thank you.
Did you?
It was designed by a friend of my brother's called Clifton Lewis. He's a friend of my brother's.
Yeah. And so, is there any illustrations in the actual book, or is it?
Unfortunately, no. I'm sorry, Mark.
Oh no, it's fine.
Although I know that for my current novel, I'm not a great illustrator myself, so my dad was actually painting what could be used as a potential. I mean, there are a few paintings based on my work, and he could. So we might have so just remember, if you see a quite elegant painting on the cover of my next novel, just know that that was designed by my dad.
Good, yeah. No, because it just sparked me out. Can you just show us for people that watch on YouTube the cover again? Because I think it's done really, really well. I love the contrast of the color. Yeah, it looks really good.
Well, thank my brother's friend Clifton. He designed it.
Yeah.
And
can I just ask you as well, Declan? Was that kind of done over the last couple of years, that particular book with your different short stories?
Yeah, I mean, the idea of it kind of zoomed in and out. In that I gradually over time wrote short stories. Some were written over lockdown. So, for example, Panzerlied was written during lockdown.
Okay.
My short story UFO was actually written in 2019. So during the summer of 2019, before lockdown. And whereas others like Panzerlied, there were some others in the story that were written. Others were revived based on old ideas.
Okay.
And what caused me to publish them as a collected group like that was I sent one of them, it was called Bloop, to The Stinging Fly. And I got a rejection. I tried sending some of them to certain collections, but they got rejected. So I decided to basically gather them together. It was more an experiment to see like what I could do with Kindle, really.
Mm. And did you get what did you get somebody to a publisher, or did you just do it
I
self-publishing?
self-published it on Kindle.
Okay.
I
Oh yeah,
self-published it
okay.
on Kindle Direct Publication.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Because that's a great way to do it because
Yeah.
you know, for first time authors. Would you agree with me, Declan?
It's good if you want to get your work out there, but I will
Yeah.
warn people it's very difficult to get it to sell.
Mm,
I
it
have
is,
to
yeah.
confess, like I tried marketing it on Amazon with the Amazon ads thing, and I
Mm,
don't think I really got any purchases. I know a lot of people very close to me have bought the book, but
yeah,
I have to
yeah.
confess, and I know quite a few of the Inkslingers bought the book, but I have to confess that they're not like I'd be careful. Just I mean, by all means, if you're out of options, go ahead, do it.
Yeah.
Another thing, but I would warn any other writers just to be careful that you'll then have to find different ways to try and get your word of your work out there.
Mm-hmm. And did you have like a night where you like a what's it called, a name escapes me, the you know, the author's night where you got to publicize your book, like
I never got a chance to do that because it was done during lockdown.
oh yeah,
When the
yeah,
collection The Early Strange, I mean, if you're talking about a launch, I'm hoping to do that with Blood and
launch
Gears.
night, sorry, yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
I'm hoping to do that with Blood and Gears.
Mm,
Although personally, I'd rather do that sometime during the afternoon, hopefully, because I don't know yet. So that like I think that's where I'd be less tired. But
mm,
because it was during lockdown, I wasn't sure if I was to do a launch or not. I didn't know. You have to remember in 2021 when we were still in lockdown in summer, like there was no certainty
yeah.
that it was going to end. Like it's
Mm,
especially notable if you look at a lot of videos from that time. We're all kind of sensed that this is going to go on. Now it doesn't. Now it hasn't. It stopped. But at the time,
yeah, I know. And did you try the libraries, Declan? Did you try and get into the libraries?
afraid not. Haven't done that yet.
Mm. Because and what you can do is what I've done, which I found very good, is for anybody that's listening, you can get in touch with Alan Hanna's and Rathmines, because once they buy the
Right.
book off you, they supply all the libraries with with your book, you
Okay.
know.
Alan Hallis. Sorry. Can you?
Hanna's HANNAS. I'll put on the show notes for people to check
Yeah.
out. Like they're very good for helping Irish authors, you know.
All right. Thank you for that, Mark. I'll take
No
note of
problem.
that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm sure they won't mind me giving them a plug on the podcast.
I'm sure. Well, it spreads their business.
Exactly, exactly. No, I found them very, very good, like for helping me out. So it's worth checking out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And can I just ask you as well, Declan, kind of what keeps you motivated in your writing? I know it's probably because it is motivational podcast, so I kind of have to ask that
Whoa.
question. Like,
I think honestly, I have to say, I think when I'm certain that people are going to read it, like ultimately, more than making any money out of my books, really what I want to do is write something that I guess will get read.
mm,
And I think to me, that's when a text really comes to life, is when you read it. And it's when somebody else especially reads it, like, you know, it can be quite nice knowing somebody else loved your book, I'm sure. Like, and knowing that you actually made someone else happier that you gave something.
yeah, no, that's a great point. Yeah, and have you ever kind of how could you put hit a metaphorical wall in your writing, and how have you dealt with that?
Yeah. I'm trying to think because I have had those points, but I'm trying to think like I'm trying to honestly think. I think writing them down first and then typing them helped get
Mm,
through. That precise regimentation, that extreme regimentation I dedicated, while it can be incredibly tiring, it absolutely keeps you going. And sometimes I've had a manuscript where I didn't expect to write something on the long run, but then I ended up doing that just out of like I want to see where it would go.
yeah, yeah.
Something that can also help with the block is as I said, like when I worked on a manuscript, I often sometimes sent maybe the first 3 chapters to my parents to read, or the
Mm,
first 2 chapters. And basically, if you're wondering what I'm doing there, is because it means we're going to talk about it, and it means it's going to be on your lips, if that makes sense.
Oh, it
So I think
does,
that can
absolutely, yeah.
certainly help. Like for anyone who's writing, that would absolutely be a good thing to do, is send it to
Mm.
your nearest and dearest to read, and like be amazed at what other people can get out of something.
Yeah, wow, that's great. That's a great answer. Like, and I absolutely love what you said there about writing stuff out rough first, and then, well, not rough, but writing it out
Mm-hmm.
on paper, and then typing it out.
Yeah.
Just that makes so much sense because me personally, what I've done since I started writing, was just type it all out. It's just kind of got like
Okay.
habitual now, you know. But it's
Yeah.
certainly going to be something I'm going to take into
Thank
account.
you.
So
I'm
thank you very
glad
much
that
for
I
that.
could. Yeah. You know, I have to confess that like I used to do that myself, Mark. But what
Mm.
I found is that sometimes I found my like when I just typed it up, it wasn't as great. Whereas like what I find is that I think the quality of my writing improved when I started writing it down first.
Mm.
And I think it's because you have a base, you have a bedrock. You understand this idea, you have a bedrock. Um you have a bedrock essentially to which to mount your document on,
Mm.
to mount your manuscript on.
Yeah, exactly. No, that's great. You know, thanks. That's really good advice. Really good. And I was going to ask you something else there. It's gone out of my head. I hate when that happens. But anyway, no, this is great. Thanks a lot for coming on, Declan. It's been
Thank
like
you.
it's great talking to you. And can I just ask you a couple of your favorites because I always do that when I have a guest on.
My
Uh, like your favorite kind of what would your favorite music be yourself to listen to when you're chilling out?
my favorite music. It's often varied either between I'm thinking particularly either between either folk music, as in often of an English or Irish background, or country music from America. Like if you think of someone like Johnny Cash or even someone
Yeah,
like Bruce
great.
Springsteen, he's not country at all, but like I mean he's of that similar vein.
Yeah, great.
I think it varies depending on the mood. What I found with music, especially when I'm writing, because I sometimes listen to music when I'm writing something.
Mm.
And often what sort of music I listen to depends on what I'm writing about.
Yeah. Oh, that's very interesting because I only started doing that a while ago as well, and it maybe not lyrics, but just maybe even not classical, but just music with no lyrics. Can really kind of get you in the zone. I think.
Yeah, I have to say though, I've become to increasingly prefer music with lyrics. I like music that tells a story.
Mm.
I
Yeah.
like music that tells a story.
Oh no, yeah, exactly. No, me too. Me too. That yeah, great point. Great point. I actually remember what I was going to say to you there, Declan. Do you know, for instance, you probably go to some of the live Inkslingers meetings. Yeah.
Alas, I don't, mainly because of logistics. I mean, like I live all the way in Dun Laoghaire, so I live in Dun
Okay.
Laoghaire,
Yeah. Mm.
and it often takes a really long bus trip just for a simple writing session. So most of the time I've
Yeah.
attended on Zoom. I think the last physical session I attended was the launch of your book,
Oh, you're very good
mainly
to come to that.
because
Thanks very much.
yeah, I loved that. I have it here. Don't worry,
Oh, that's
I
very
have
kind of you.
it
Thanks very
there.
much. Thank you.
Yes. Um,
Yeah.
thank
Yeah.
you.
No, but because the point I was going to make about that was, you know, because I went to the one the other night for
The culture
no
night.
the culture night on Friday, which is very good,
Yeah.
and that's the first time I ever got to attend the actual thing in person. And I get exactly what your point is by writing it down. You hadn't just got your computer, so you were just given a page, and you just had
Exactly.
to you just had to do it on the spot,
Mm-hmm.
which I found really good. You know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right. Anything else? Because I can see the remaining meeting time is
Oh
ticking
no,
on
it's
my.
no. Just say thank you. No, just well. So, who would your favorite author be as well, Declan? Who would your favorite author or book
A lot
be?
of my favorite authors are probably people wouldn't be read normally. I think my I have sort of a phase if this is okay. So like my three favorite novelists I think in general were H.G. Wells, Jules Verne, and J.R. Tolkien. They were my first three. But I
Okay.
think a good few honorable mention. But if we're talking about more contemporary books, I think another favorite author of mine would be Robert A. Heinlein. the man who wrote the original Starship Troopers, which is nothing like Verhoeven's movie. It's way better. It's a very harsh book, but it's a very powerful book. I tend to like those books that are harsh, often that deal with this very masculine military theme. Like another example of that would be a novel by like Things They Carried by Tim O'Brien. It's basically a biography of his experiences during the Vietnam War. And I find those novels, that's another genre that I'm heavily inspired. It's that particular form of American war novel that deals very much with the individual man at arms who's like facing up to his fears or dealing with. So that's another example. That would be Stephen Crane's The Red Badge of Courage. And then to finish off with a more contemporary novelist would be, he's dead now, Tom Clancy. That's another. I actually did my dissertation on his first book, The Hunt for Red October. And that and Patriot Games are two of my favorite contemporary novels. I mean, they were written in the 80s, but like, so that shows how dated I am. Like, even my so-called contemporary literature is like, I mean, Things They Carried was the 90s, the 80s and the 90s.
Yeah, because that actually leads on nicely to the next question, because Patriot Games is a great movie as well. They made a great movie.
Yes.
Yeah, that was really, really good. Really good. Do you have a favorite movie? Would you have a favorite film or films?
I don't, but there are a lot of movies. There are movies that I like.
Okay.
I mean, again, they're mostly old ones. Like, I say one of my favorite movies was Indiana Jones with Harrison Ford.
I love that. Yeah.
Both The Hunt for Red October and Patriot Games would count there as well. Even older movie that I'd like would be Lawrence of Arabia. Really old, very big movie with Peter O'Toole. I don't know if you've ever watched that. It's often seen as an old classic.
Okay, yeah, it's one I must check out. Yeah.
Another movie I liked. I'm trying to think of others because there's quite a few. Another movie is an even older movie that I watched very recently called A Night to Remember. It's basically about the sinking of the Titanic, but it's focused more on the crew. It's a movie focused more on the men that are actually trying to solve the problem, trying to get the people off. I mean, you have scenes of the passengers as well, but it's really like the real focus on the crew. And like these very stoic Englishmen trying to get everyone else off the boat as it's about to sink into the depths.
That's called Night to Remember, is it? Declan?
Yes.
Yeah,
it's a very old. It's a black and white movie.
I think I did see that years ago, actually. Yeah, I think I did see that. Yeah, great stuff. Yeah, well, that's a great list. Yeah, I love.
Yeah, that's only a tiny. Like that's literally the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah,
fun. Like the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah, great stuff.
To, like the kind of movies I like.
Yeah, no, thanks a lot for sharing that. And one last question. If you were to live anywhere else in the world, I know you're originally from God, you said
Paris.
Paris.
I was born in Paris, but I've much more links with Dublin and Dun Laoghaire.
Yeah. If you could live anywhere else in the world, bar Ireland, where would you live?
I don't know, honestly. I don't. You have to be careful when asking that question because it's like the grass is always greener on the other side.
Of course, yeah.
Personally, I'm quite happy in our little Emerald Isle because it's like,
yeah.
I have to confess that especially after lockdown and probably because it's often increasingly expensive to travel that I've developed this increasingly. I think what's often called in some circle, more conservative side, the Hobbit in the Shire mentality that you're happy where you are. If that makes sense. It's like I'm sure you know what I mean by the hobbits. It's like they were a race of people in the Lord of the Rings based heavily off English yeomen, essentially, that lived in the Renaissance and Middle Ages. J.R. Tolkien created a mythical race of people that were heavily based on them and lived in this thing literally called the Shire. And it was this very quaint. I mean, it was heavily based on, I think, his own idealized vision of what the countryside was like.
Oh, very interesting. Yeah, very interesting. And very quickly, your Jeremy Murphy is give him a bit of a mention. He's doing some
Yes.
work with you for you at the moment as well.
He is. Well, actually, the two people really doing the work currently are his two designers, Amit and Sumi.
Okay. Oh, very good.
They're
Yeah.
his website designers. I've been corresponding with them, and I think they've done a very good job on my website so far.
Great stuff. Yeah. No, as you know, Jeremy Murphy done work with me as well. So
He did. That's how I
done-
discovered it, by pure chance.
Yeah. Yeah, great stuff. No, I really appreciate coming on today, Declan. And is there anything else I haven't asked you before you go that you'd like to mention for the listeners? Anything? What's next yourself, or to keep an eye out for?
Don't know. I think you've done my work justice, what I've worked on. I mean, I've loads of manuscripts that I still have to publish, but take one at a time. I think it's my attitude.
No, I wish you the very best of luck going forward with all you do with your writing. It's really, really good. I love I look forward to reading your stuff every Saturday that you do your prompts, you know.
Thank you.
Great
I'm
stuff.
glad they're not based on Harry's prompts, though. They're based on work that I've been writing on.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
For ages, actually. Yeah, like since, as I said, like Blood and Gears, I first wrote on it when I was 17. And I've worked, but you wouldn't notice it if you were to read it now, because I've worked a lot on it since. I got key feedback from Oisin McGann, who was another writer. I don't know if you know him. He helped me get my work into proper order, essentially, as far as I'm concerned. And that a lot of the harsh lessons he told me about getting things published and making sure things work, I expanded to my other novels, especially going forward. And yeah, that's it.
Yeah. So thanks a lot, Declan, for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah. So thanks once again, everybody, for listening to Mark's motivational podcast, Authors Tuesday, with Declan. What's your full name again? Because I don't want to mess up your
Cosson. Declan Cosson.
Cosson. Okay, Declan, thanks a lot again. Tune in again for next Authors Tuesday. Thanks again. Thank you, Declan.
Thank you.
Cheers. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Hello everyone, Mark here. Thank you for watching another episode of my Authors Tuesday podcast. I recently published a book of children's stories called The Adventures of Larry Lamppost and Friends. The book began life as bedtime stories I wrote for my own children. If you'd like to purchase my book, follow the link in the description box below. By buying my book, you are also supporting my podcast series for authors, which is giving a voice to writers in Ireland and across the world.